Good morning and welcome to today's Intelligence Explainer. I'm your host, and we are delivering a factual, objective, and comprehensive situation report on the Middle East for May 14th, 2026. We are going to break down 2 weeks of highly consequential events to give you a clear, unbiased look at the geopolitical landscape as it stands today.
This morning's explainer is brought to you by ProWave AI, the developers of the Stylo Intel Ops open source intelligence program. We are here to set the stage and queue you up for your full Stylo News Intelligence Update morning commute.
Here is a quick look at our agenda today. We'll be covering the Strait of Hormuz flashpoint, the local and global impacts, key decision-maker perspectives, social media sentiment, our forecast of likely events, and finally, how to access the full Stylo News update.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the Strait of Hormuz flashpoint.
Over the last couple of weeks, the highly congested waters of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz have really become the epicenter of military friction. The operational contact we are tracking remains heavily concentrated right around these critical maritime choke points. Our data highlights key Iranian assets, including Karg Island and Bandar Abbas along the coast, along with the inland strategic facility at Natanz. Intelligence reports confirm that the clearest avenue for immediate military contact lies directly in these waters, where geography and asymmetric naval capabilities are actively being leveraged.
So how exactly did we arrive at this heightened state of alert? Let's walk through the timeline. On May 4th, U.S. President Donald Trump ordered military escorts for ships transiting the strait. By May 6th, the U.S. officially ended its offensive operation, Epic Fury, shifting into a defensive posture called Project Freedom, which was aimed at unblocking the strait. But things escalated quickly from there. On May 8th and 9th, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps seized the oil tanker Ocean Koi in the Gulf of Oman. This happened just hours after the U.S. military disabled 2 Iranian-flagged tankers, the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda, for violating a maritime blockade. Finally, on May 10th, we saw drone strikes on a U.S. commercial vessel near Qatar. It has been a very rapid cycle of action and reaction.
Moving on to Section 2, local to global impacts.
The cascading effects of this maritime conflict are operating on 3 very distinct tiers. Locally, Iran's new maritime transit rules are severely disrupting commercial shipping, and the IRGC has issued direct threats of missile and drone attacks against the UAE, which is obviously raising serious security concerns there. Nationally, Iran is dealing with a compounding economic crisis driven by sanctions, while over in the U.S., there's intense internal political debate over executive war powers, especially since the 60-day authorization for previous operations just expired. And internationally, the stakes are massive. Consider this: roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes right through the Strait of Hormuz. Because of that immense risk to the global energy market, Pakistan and Qatar are currently engaged in active mediation efforts to try and prevent a major economic shock.
Section 3 focuses on key decision-maker perspectives.
What we're looking at is a direct contrast in strategic objectives driving this current deadlock. On one hand, the United States has ordered naval escorts under Project Freedom to strictly enforce freedom of navigation for commercial shipping, all while maintaining readiness to resume offensive strikes if provoked. On the other hand, Iran's IRGC is asserting regional sovereignty. They've established a Persian Gulf Strait Authority to demand transit tolls and registration, and they have made it clear: unauthorized passage or U.S. military escorts will be met with a decisive response, even threatening to turn the strait into a mass grave for warships. It is a fundamental, deeply entrenched diplomatic impasse.
That brings us to Section 4, social media sentiment analysis. When we analyze open-source intelligence on the X platform, a very clear picture of public perception emerges. First, there's broad, palpable anxiety about a full-scale Gulf escalation and the inevitable economic ripple effects, especially spiking fuel prices. Second, sentiment is highly critical of the Iranian regime. One of the most prominent themes we tracked was intense hostility toward the IRGC for environmental oil dumping. In fact, a lot of users are labeling that action as a form of terrorism. Finally, while we aren't seeing much visible street protest activity right now, which is likely due to internal suppression, there's strong underlying support for assertive Western and Israeli responses. It reflects a public that is wary of the regime's actions, but also deeply fearful of the costs associated with a wider war.
Now for Section 5, our forecast and likely events.
Right now, 2 critical questions are dominating the intelligence outlook. First, will Iran launch a direct conventional strike against Israel? And second, under the immense weight of sanctions and military pressure, will the Iranian regime actually remain in control of the country?
Based on our intelligence assessment,
We can answer these questions with a medium to high degree of confidence. First, the regime is highly likely to maintain control in the near term. Analysts note they are projecting command coherence and using coercive control mechanisms to prevent mass unrest. When it comes to military action, the data indicates Tehran strongly prefers calibrated, indirect proxy actions, like those via Hezbollah and Lebanon, and continued maritime pressure rather than a massive, direct strike on Israel. In fact, a direct large-scale attack is assessed as unlikely unless Israel or the U.S. directly strikes core Iranian strategic assets, like the Natanz nuclear facility or senior regime leadership. So expect the maritime domain to remain the primary, daily flashpoint.
Finally, Section 6, the Stylo News Call to Action.
To get the full in-depth analysis of these events and understand exactly what they mean for global markets and security, make sure to listen to the Stylo News Intel Update podcast on your favorite channel. You can also subscribe to get AI-powered news on demand directly at stylonews.com. Thank you for joining us for this morning's explainer. As we leave you with today's data, consider this final question. If the maritime clashes we are seeing in the Strait of Hormuz are merely the symptoms of this geopolitical stalemate, what happens to the stability of the entire global economy if the underlying diplomatic deadlock remains unbroken? Stay informed, stay objective, and we'll see you next time.